So, your campaign fizzled out due to scheduling issues. It's a conundrum all this time that almost everyone who plays TTRPGs will inevitably deal with. And although it might just be a bummer to some players, to that dungeon master who spent hours upon hours prepping for the campaign, it can be devastating. I'm Tom the Adventure Sage, longtime game master and part of the Fable Brothers duo, and today we're going to be dissecting some ways that you can overcome the real big bad of campaigns, scheduling issues. Let's dive in. There are many ways that scheduling conflicts can drive a campaign to its demise, and most of them can be put into two categories: the unavoidable and the preventable. When we look at the unavoidable, this encompasses things like having a child, moving out of town, an illness, or a tragedy, things that a campaign just won't realistically take precedence over. But on the other hand, there are a lot of preventable conflicts that arise, like the overbooked,
Oh, I promised my friend I would hang out today, sorry.
the forgetful,
Wait, we're playing tonight? Okay, I'll be there in an hour.
just not feeling it.
Sorry, I just really want to stay home tonight.
Now, sometimes this can be valid, but if it becomes a pattern, then it becomes an issue. All of these, regardless of who's at fault or if there's anyone even to blame at all, can drive a campaign to its doom. But before we take a look at real-time solutions, let's look at some methods you can implement to avoid these even happening in the first place. Now, it's important to note that TTRPGs are completely subjective from table to table, but the following are strategies that I have personally found success in when I'm looking for a long-term group of players or planning a long-term campaign. For reference, my core party is 3 years strong and they're some of the best friends I've ever made. Be selective about your players. I love spending time with my friends and I'm always happy to hang out, but when it comes to D&D night, I want it to be about D&D. I put a lot of care and effort into my campaigns and I want that energy reciprocated from my players, which is why I'm selective about who I play with. When it comes to long-form campaigns, one-shots are a completely different thing. And while being on the same page can easily nullify a lot of those preventable scheduling conflicts, there are other things to watch out for when you're assembling a long-form party. Where are they in life? Not existentially, but just physically. If you invite Johnny to your 2-year-long campaign, but in 3 months Johnny's graduating college and gonna move back with his parents, you see the problem there? It's just one of those things where all of your schedules might align right now, but if you have just a little bit of foresight, you might be able to see that cliff that your campaign's about to roll off of. Now let's talk about being selective of your players from a social point of view, because it can feel a little weird in the process. It can almost feel like a job interview to be your friend. For example, in the fall of 2022, I moved across the country to Colorado and immediately started trying to assemble a group to run a long-term campaign. And how I did this was simple. I joined a few Facebook groups and put out a synopsis of the campaign I was looking to run. And then the people who were interested messaged me. I went out to coffee with all of them individually and we just talked about D&D, our influences, our style of play. And while we were talking about the semantics of D&D, we were simultaneously getting a vibe check of each other. Like, should we be friends? Even beyond D&D, do we gel as people? It was almost like a weird platonic date. But the thing is, it worked. Like I said, 3 years later, and my D&D group is my main group of friends. Some of them will be in my wedding party. That being said, it is important to treat this platonic coffee date process as a two-way street. You're not holding auditions for your campaign. You're simply two people seeing if you are fit to play D&D together. If you treat it like that, it will feel more organic. Now, like I said, this whole process can feel a little weird at first, but it will save you a lot of hassle in the future, and it might even lead to some actual friendships. Because that's the goal, right? Don't you kind of want the people you're playing D&D with every week for a prolonged period of time to be your friends? And even beyond that, a D&D campaign is a social contract. You need to make sure that everyone agrees on the schedule, the playstyle, and all the other responsibilities that come with this commitment. And then of course, after you have your party, have a session 0. Okay, so you've vetted your players, everyone meshes, everyone's committed, it's time to start your campaign. It's time to buy that $200 custom painted Orcus mini for the final showdown you have planned in 11 months and the player whose warlock signed a pact with Orcus was just told by his job that he needs to move out of state. Don't over-prepare. We've all been there, daydreaming about the final fight of a campaign that you haven't even started running. It's only natural for DMs to fantasize about their campaigns turning into epic tales about characters strong enough to fight gods. But sometimes you can take all the precautions and life still happens. When you're planning a long-form campaign, it's totally fine to have the ending in mind. You should have ideas about where you want the campaign to lead, but it's always best to start small. Something I always do when I start a new long-form campaign is have the first 4 to 5 sessions be about something completely detached from the main arc that I'm planning. That way, if any big changes happen in the first month or 2 of my campaign, I can easily adapt. It's almost like the tutorial section of your campaign. This will also allow your party to find their groove in the game and above the table. Then, as you hit your stride, you can start committing further and further down the road. Now remember, these strategies are subjective to me. Pick and choose them as you wish, but like I said, even if you do everything to prepare, sometimes life still happens. If your prep was in vain and scheduling conflicts still arise, here are some ways that you can pivot in real time to keep your campaign alive. Writing player characters out of the story. Now honestly, this is a common solution, and it works temporarily or permanently. In Critical Role Campaign 2, when Travis and Laura had their child, their characters were written out of the story in a very tasteful way that even propelled the plot forward. In my previous campaign, I had a very similar situation and I handled it very similarly. One of my players was going to have a child, so the session before, we worked as organically as possible to have his character be captured. And then the rest of the party went on a whole arc for multiple sessions to rescue him. And when he came back a few weeks later, it was actually super cool to see the party catch him up on their adventure. While you never really want one of your players to leave the table, this is one of those solutions that can actually add depth to the campaign. Unfortunately though, sometimes you have to permanently remove a character. For example, that player of mine who had a child ended up moving back closer to his family a few months after. Luckily, we knew about this weeks before, so me and him were able to satisfyingly write his character out of the story. Remember, even if someone needs to leave the campaign, if you have the luxury of knowing beforehand, you can still make lemonade out of those lemons. Don't squander the luxury of knowing that the end is coming. Now, it's inevitable that as time goes on, things change. The schedule that you all agreed on 1 year ago might not be working anymore. So if you're experiencing more scheduling conflicts than normal, consider changing the schedule. For example, my D&D day has been Thursdays for the better part of 3 years now, but in February of this year, every single week, someone different was out of town. It's a little hard to write a different character out of the campaign every single session, so we took an entire month off. Now, in my experience, taking an unplanned, prolonged break is the #1 killer of campaigns. One session gets canceled, and then the next, and before you know it, this campaign is thrown in the graveyard of what could have been. In order to keep this from happening, it's important to keep the momentum of your campaign going even if you aren't playing. The moment I realized that we were going to be taking the entirety of February off, I immediately started planning for March. We even doubled down, scheduling extra sessions in March to make up for what we missed in February. And you know what? I kinda liked it. Because I had the entirety of February off from running, I took that extra time and invested it into prepping for March. So instead of prepping on a weekly basis, I prepped for multiple sessions simultaneously, almost treating the next stretch of my campaign like a big chapter. It was honestly a very welcome change, and I might even talk to my party about doing it again in the future. Just because you set a cadence at the beginning does not mean you have to keep it indefinitely. The most important thing you can do to keep your campaign alive is communicate and adapt as a group. TTRPGs are a collaborative storytelling game. Therefore, you must collaborate.